Right. Good evening, everybody. We've got a very special guest tonight and a good friend of mine as well. Nick Tenconi, welcome to my channel. How are you doing at the moment?
Very well, thank you, sir, and thank you very much for having me on.
Good stuff, good stuff. And if you just want to tell everybody that's watching who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
Sure.
Start at the beginning.
Yeah, Nick Tenconi, interim leader at UKIP, and also chief operations officer at Turning Point UK. So, what I do is essentially frontline activism, which is exactly what's called for, bearing in mind the enemies that we face, and obviously a huge part of that in terms of an enemy is voter apathy, voter indifference. The people have been trodden on and betrayed for years over and over again. So when we talk about voter indifference and voter apathy, actually part of the activism I'm involved in is to say to people, we actually we hear you, we understand you. You've been betrayed so many times by the establishment, by the corrupt governing elite, that anyone in their right mind would switch off and say, well, what's the point? It's like anything in life. So it's all about taking it to the front line against our enemies, leading by example, as lots of other brave and courageous, strong patriots have done over the last few decades as things have just gotten worse and worse in the UK. So in terms of what I do and who I am, this frontline activist in the lead against or the fight back against the culture war. And I'd go as far as to say satanic evil, frankly, Richard.
Yeah, I mean, how does this idea of activism and leading the party, how does that sync together? So, is there a difference between being an activist and being a leader of a party? Or do you see them the same thing?
One and the same thing. We're at war. One and the same thing. Absolutely. So, yeah, in peacetime, you could argue that that's two separate things, but the public deserves better and the public's going to get better. So, leader of a party, I find myself in the illustrious position, very, very blessed and privileged to be in the position I'm in as interim leader of UKIP. But 100%, you need to be, we're going to be leading from the front, and we're going to be inspiring hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of our core demographic base. And in 5 years' time, we're voting our way out of this.
Nick, who do you see as the core demographic base? Who is that? Who are those people that you're going to get voting for UKIP? Because obviously we've got a lot of competition in this space. So what makes you different from Reform or SDP? And who are the people that you're really going after?
Sure. So our key target audience is going to be the most trampled on within society, the most betrayed within society, the demographic and the communities that have had their areas and regions flooded, their towns and cities flooded with undocumented, unchecked migrants, who come from and have an agenda unknown to be compatible with Western British Christian values, and typically via the Home Office and what is now known as Operation Scatter, those individuals are pumped into the poorest, most working class areas. And we see, once again, it's demonstrable that we live in a socialist society. Britain is a socialist country. It is completely centralized. That is one of the key defining markers of socialism. It is a socialist state in which we live in. So the local power is no more. They are powerless to do anything. We see protest after protest, and the local level is either completely corrupted and compromised by left-wing activists, or they're powerless to do anything because it's a Home Office directive. So when I say the most aggrieved within society, we're talking about those working class communities that have been completely betrayed by the government. Now, there will be, in terms of the class system, there will, of course, be middle class. There will be other classes and other areas and other peoples who completely back the UKIP mission, totally on side with us.
So
But those are the people that we're going to be talking to.
sure. So obviously the demographic you're going after, I mean, years ago, we're talking in the 70s and the 80s, I think voter turnout was 70, maybe it's up to 80 or 90% in some areas. That's completely died a death. and there's massive voter apathy. What's your plan for getting those millions of people that just don't engage politically? They're not interested. They don't do it. How can you get them from being sitting on the sofa complaining or sitting down the pub complaining to being political activists and actually getting out and joining UKIP and basically fulfilling the mission that we've got to fulfill? Because I mean, we'll talk about that in a minute, but I think the country's never been in such peril since the Second World War. So how do you get those millions that maybe agree with what we're saying but don't even bother to register to vote? How do we get people motivated, get them signed up, and get away from this nonsense that says, well, it doesn't matter who you vote for, you can't do anything anyway? How can we beat that mindset? And I think that's a fairly widespread mindset that we need to overcome. What do we do about that?
So yeah, when you're talking about outrage culture, I'd also like to address WhatsApp group culture and the echo chamber that is the WhatsApp group. And so it's the outrage through the keyboard, it's the outrage through the 1,000 messages I've got on my phone right now that I refuse to look at because 99% of it is outrage. So what are we going to do? Well, I break it down into key areas. One is leadership, of course. I was asked yesterday, and I should be asked again, time and time again, what makes you different? What makes your party different? What makes your mission different from all the other people that just become one-man bands and take the limelight and enjoy the show, etc.? And as I keep telling everyone that asks me that fantastic question, the rent is due every single day on trust, loyalty, and respect. So I don't intend on letting our voters down, and I don't intend on letting the chairman down or the party down or the committee down. I don't intend on letting anyone down who's invested time and effort in me. And which kind of brings us on to the next most important thing about taking it to the people. I'm very pleased to be launching the UKIP Roadshow within the next couple of weeks, where we'll be visiting our target seats, as we've just discussed, and we'll be speaking to the people about what exactly they want to see change within their regions and within their communities.
Okay, and obviously the other thing is you need large amounts of activists. You can't do it all on your own. You can certainly lead, but you can't do everything on your own. So you need a large amount of activists to come alongside you to join the party. I'm going to ask you the $60 million question, the Tommy Robinson question. Would you welcome Tommy into the party if he was to join? And obviously, if he was to join, we all know the problems he's facing and the legal challenges he's facing. But I think as we all know, he could bring a serious number of people with him. So that's a straight question, Nick. Would you welcome Tommy into the party?
Yeah. So I'd also like to, before answering that, I'd like to address another aspect to your question before. How are we going to do it? We're obviously speaking with, we're not silly. We're speaking with key names, key household brands about whether they want to be on the UKIP mission. And that means, do they believe in our new manifesto, which is as right-wing as it's ever been, and it's as radical as it's ever been? Do you believe in our manifesto? Do you believe in our missions, of which there are 6? And do you believe in me and the vision and the message that we're putting out there? And to your question about Tommy, there are a number of true patriots who we have made it known publicly and in person. We've delivered the message that they are true patriots, are more than welcome at UKIP, and we certainly won't be turning our back on those true patriots. Unlike Nigel Farage and Richard Tice and High Command at Reform, which have repeatedly, time and time again, shown that they are liberal and libertarian in orientation, self-interested, big business, establishment, Tory 2.0. We won't turn our back on true patriots.
So is that a yes to Tommy if he decided to join the party?
Yeah, I can't reach out any more than I already have done.
That's fine. That's fine. I mean, the reason I asked that, Nick, a lot of people saying, ask Nick. I know the answer, okay, because we've had these discussions, but the public haven't had the discussions that we've had. So, I just think that needs to be put to bed. And of course, that is that puts a lot of clear water between UKIP and the Reform Party. And one of the things that I think that I've seen with Reform, and we've seen, and look, I'm not going to get this to be into a Reform bashing party, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of people, patriots that back Reform. I understand why they do that. I don't agree with that analysis, but I understand why they do it, and I don't want to, alienate, half of our base. But I think it's a very fair point that the reality is that UKIP have done something that Reform have never done, and that's welcome people that have been ostracized, demonized for doing nothing else than telling the truth. And I think that's a massively important thing. So what, I mean, a lot of people in the comments, Nick, are saying, okay, could Reform and UKIP join together? You know, what's your take on all that sort of stuff when people are saying, you know, there's too many parties on the right, you're splitting? What I get a lot of, right, I get a lot of people coming on the channel saying, Richard, you're splitting the vote by pushing UKIP. Everyone should be backing Reform. We should get Reform in, and then we can change Reform. What's your take on that sort of comment as leader of UKIP?
Sure. So I think I've understood your question. The vast majority of people very much enjoy talking about the unifying of the right. Okay. So the question we have to ask ourselves, for your audience and for people like us, Richard, we have to ask ourselves, how long has the right been needed to be unified for, and how long has it taken for the right to unify? And if we do the timeline, we find that the right has needed to unify for an incredibly long time. We also find that it hasn't unified. There's a reason why it hasn't unified. There's a reason why Nigel left the party in 2016. There's a reason why he's brought in Mohammed Youssef as chairman. There's a reason why the Conservative Party behave the way they behave, because they're a broad church party. Stand for everything, stand for nothing. You mentioned SDP and a few other bits and pieces. We need a radical right-wing party. In 5 years' time, we're voting our way out of this. Now, when I use words like radical and right-wing, I mean culturally, but also economics is a factor. So there are parties that have been around, you mentioned some of them, for 10, 15, 20 years, and they've not returned anything the likes of which that UKIP has done and achieved in its past. That brand is still alive with UKIP. That notoriety is still alive. UKIP never went anywhere. We're solvent. We've got a fantastic chairman who's gone above and beyond endlessly to make sure we stay, because you're always going to get attacks from the left and vitriol. Solvent, ready, and it hasn't gone anywhere in terms of the prowess and the meaning, the origins of the brand, which was to stand up for the working classes. And going back to those demographics you spoke about earlier on, old Labour, we will see a mass return home to UKIP, where they belong and where they will be welcomed with open arms back into the organisation. So I would say unifying the right, it's a great soundbite and people love to talk about it. There's about, last time I checked, there's 14 parties on the right. Who made the biggest dent this summer? We can talk about SDP, you can talk about Homeland if you want. I'm certainly not going to be disparaging towards, you mentioned earlier on quite sensibly, this isn't a Reform bashing session, but you said you can understand why people are backing Reform. I can also understand, Richard, why people are backing Reform. We're too right-wing for a lot of patriots. Let's just start calling it what it is, because I'm running out of patience with Reform. We're at war, and they have said no to mass deportations. Reform and the patriots that support Reform are not as right-wing as we are. They simply don't have it in them. They're not our breed. That's absolutely fine. So we've got another liberal party. Great. I'm not really concerned about the parties on the right and the fringe on the right, and I'm certainly not concerned with the far right neo-Nazis on the right either. So there's still a space to be addressed. So I'm not overly, now Reform, the mask has slipped with Reform. Now it has. I'm even less concerned about them than I was 3-4 months ago.
And again, could you just articulate, Nick, again, because there's a lot of people watching this channel that and I'll watch this back later, that won't understand exactly what you believe. So could you just explain, as far as I know, you're a civic nationalist. You're coming from a Christian ideological background rather than a solely political background. Could you just explain, and obviously this doesn't exclude anyone that doesn't believe in Christianity. I mean, it's you know, there's a massive push for this thing called cultural Christianity. But could you just explain for the viewers the difference between civic nationalism and ethno-nationalism, and why civic nationalism is the way to save the country, where, well, as I believe, ethno-nationalism is the way to destroy the country. Could you just explain that and how this sort of identity politics dynamic works with that as well, so that people understand exactly where you're coming from ideologically?
Sure. So I've personally never been an ethno-nationalist, but from my learning and my research and talking with people, there's probably two strands of ethno-nationalist. The most extreme is your Hitler Brigade. So that's your Aryan race brigade. So there's a certain element of you have to prove your genetics, you have to prove your DNA to prove that you're part of what was conceived as being the master race. Now, I'm not well versed at all because I've never been interested in that side of things at all. But I presume the rules have changed depending on which continent and which country you're in, because obviously that movement is still alive. But on the very, very far right, I'm presuming, because you've got factions everywhere, I'm presuming that's one of the most extreme factions. So unless you can trace your DNA, it's completely about race with the ethno-nationalist. Okay. And I'm speaking to you factually now. You've asked the question, I'm speaking to you factually. Slightly inward from that is probably, let's take the case of Britain. So they'd be happy with the French being here. They'd happy with anything Germanic being here, obviously Celtic, anything Anglo, but they'd probably draw the line at anything Latino or anything Greek, for example, because they believe that the bloodline's diluted from Islam or from the Middle East at some point in. So it's all about race. So you've asked a great question. This is actually very important. So on the far right, you have probably two main camps, no pun intended, and you've basically got that situation whereby it's all about race. It's in one way or another, it's all about race. And they believe that in terms of bloodline and genetics, that proves your worth to the Aryan or master race or whatever. That's my understanding. Now, where we are with UKIP is unashamedly right wing. That means culture first and economy second. That's the first thing I'd say to your viewers is culture first, economy second. We are solely focused, paramount above everything else, that a culture holds a country together. And I guess leading on from that, in that culture and religion are one and the same thing in terms of heritage and in terms of what offers people identity and shared values, morals and ethics, how we behave within society and how we treat one another. So in the West and in Britain, that is Christianity. And that's never going to change, not under my watch and lots of other good people's watch as well. So it's about culture and not race. So it's a great question. And I think I've answered it as succinctly as I can. It's not about race. It's about culture. We can have discussions about race, and we can have discussions about my concerns over Pakistani immigrants being here, and Kashmiri and Somalia and Syrian and potentially, definitely even Palestinian going forward. We can have all those conversations. But great question, straight answer. On the far right, all the splits you've got, it's about race. Whereas UKIP, small c conservative, or what we specialize in is the ideology of conservatism, to conserve. We're not concerned in terms of both the ideology and the vision. We're not concerned with race. We're concerned with culture. And our culture needs to be saved. And there are ways of doing that. And I'd like to embellish, either ask me what you're thinking next, mate, or I'll embellish on that. But we are going to witness the rise of the far right with the far left, no matter how slow or fast. And we need to make sure that our culture remains safe by staving off those aspects, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I think the other thing is obviously one of the there's a couple of massive problems. I mean, the first question that I didn't ask you was, how much peril is the UK in? But I don't think I even need to ask that question, because we know that if we don't sort something out in the next 5 years, we're finished. So there's three main threats: globalism, communism, and Islamism. So let's look at Islamism, immigration, illegals. What are you going to do about them? What are we going to do with mass deportations of people that have come here illegally? How are we going to find them once they've been given citizenship by these traitor governments that we've had in power? So let's look at Islamism and illegal immigration, because obviously it seems to me, and I could be reading this wrong, that the vast majority of people that are coming to this country are from a certain demographic, and obviously that's where the Islamists come from. And obviously we're differentiating between Islamists and Muslims. But it's the political Islam and the dangers of that with the with the extreme organizations that are embedding themselves in our society and in our country. What do we do about that, Nick? What's the solution?
Okay, so let's start with UKIP's mission. So there's 6 missions. So in the case of radical Islam, the party pledges to end and remove radical Islam and call out and educate, most importantly, on far left Islamist totalitarian propaganda. That's very important. This propaganda is aimed at undermining the West, and its aim is to further increase Islamic sectarian dominance and further erode our culture. Okay, so the threat, you mentioned the globalism, communism, and Islamism. So focusing first on Islamism, it's literally there in our missions for your viewers, for everyone else. It's literally there in our 6 missions. Okay, so it's end and remove radical Islam and the Islamists from Britain, not the peaceful, moderate Muslims, law-abiding British Muslims who respect freedom of speech, democracy, the rule of law, and this is a Christian land. Not just freedom of speech. We've got to stop talking about freedom of speech, democracy, and rule of law. No, and Christianity. So that answers that question. I think you mentioned about how we would do it. So breaking it down, there's 45,000 on MI5's terror watch list. 39,000 are Islamic. MI5 know who these people are, where they are, give or take an inch. Get rid of them. Deport them. Get rid of them. If you're on a list, that's for a reason.
What do you do with the ones that have been born here and the parents have been here for 2 or 3 generations? Where do you send them? I mean, that's a serious question. If we're gonna, can you deport someone? Okay, it happened with Shamima Begum where she got a citizenship stripped and she was born in the UK. But how can you actually do that? What's the practicalities of that? Because obviously it's all right saying yes, we're going to deport them, but how do you do that if they were born here?
So UKIP's going to be the party of mass deportations, and at the moment, patriots and concerned citizens will be very aware of this expression, mass deportations. What they're going to start hearing more and more about is remigration or repatriation or citizenship deprivation. This is all in our laws, by the way, for those that don't know. It's all there in our laws. It can be done. It is done. And not that I would ever stick up for the establishment, but there are good people still within the establishment, in potentially the Conservative Party, for example, where this sort of thing is happening. It's not mainstream media, because why would the mainstream media tell patriots what they want to hear, etc.? So it is do it to the point. How do you do it? Is it possible? You can do it. And where would they go? Wherever. There's lots. Sweden's doing something at the moment. You can pay people to leave. You can ask them where they want to go, but ultimately you're cutting potentially a deal by saying, right, there's some money, now leave, or else, basically. So it is doable. Let's just say, for example, they're from, I don't know, Lebanon, okay, or Kuwait, I don't know. You go, do you have family there? Do you want to go back there, etc.? No, okay, fine, we'll pick another place. But that gives your audience an idea of the fact that this is possible, and this is happening in Europe and around the continent as well. You mentioned also about immigration. Now, I'm tempted to say this in context of reform's liberal nature, but we don't want to bash reform. But unfortunately, we've only got 5 years, Richard. So we need to start drawing comparisons and parallels, as Nigel's just announced that apparently membership's somehow gone to 90,000 at reform today. We're going to freeze immigration for 5 years. That means no more immigration. Now, in contrast, their MO, their agenda on immigration is still pretty much net zero. It's 1 in, 1 out. It's not, there's nowhere near deportations. It's 1 in, 1 out. So freeze immigration for 5 years, deploy the military into the channel to stop any more boats coming over. We're going to issue mass deportations of every illegal migrant and non-British citizens who are claiming welfare. And we are going to begin the remigration of unintegrated migrant groups. So you've got your foreign nationals, 10,000 plus in prison, gone. Your 39,000 Islamists on the terror watch list, gone. You've got your 100,000 in illegals in hotels, gone. You've got your up to 1 million in society, in British society, who are here illegally, gone. And then you've got your unintegrated communities. Why should we leave them out of it? Absolutely not. The British public We know what they want. We know what they want to see, and we're going to give that to them.
Okay, and you know, obviously that deals with the immigration and the Islamism problem. I don't think anyone watching would massively disagree with anything you've said there, Nick. I think that seems like a very sensible direction of travel to go in. One of the other issues, well, the two other issues that they kind of joined at the hip, is the idea of globalism and communism, and the way they've infested every area, every sector of society, the education system, the legal system, the civil service, and on the media. You know, the whole shooting gallery is pitted from a very left-wing, globalist, Britain-hating direction. What are you going to do about that? Because that's a real question. If you get power in 5 years' time, there needs to be a plan to deal with that really quickly. How are you going to do that?
Sure. So in terms, I'd like to draw you back to the missions, and then I'd like to give you a bit more in depth. We're going to declare war on far left extremism, Richard, on the communists and on the Marxists in our institutions, our taxpayer-funded public sector, and within society. We're going to fight and defeat the main proponents of the culture war: the communists, the Marxists, the far left extremists. We're going to call out and educate on far left totalitarian propaganda. Now, I don't know how many of our grassroots youth can be saved. I don't know, but I know we won't leave them behind. We won't give up on them because they have been indoctrinated. Most importantly, you also mentioned about globalism as well. So let me link these points up. Again, another mission of ours. We're going to challenge and stop the liberal establishment and its ties to corporations, and foreign lobbying who seek to profiteer off of the destruction of our culture. That means scrapping net zero. That means fighting back and saying no to Agenda 2030 and to globalism. Now, there's your soundbite missions. All sounds really great. Okay, fine. Obviously, having 6 missions where we've covered absolutely everything that we think our voters deserve to hear about in a nutshell that we're going after, I cannot promise that I can take down Davos, that I can take down the World Economic Forum, and no one's saying that either. But we need to start somewhere, bearing in mind how far gone we are with control over our nation. So supranational tyranny, bureaucratic tyranny over our nation, certain individuals and figureheads and laws, for example. So let's take it to policy level. Why is any member of any far left organization allowed anywhere near children? We'll put a stop to that. That means in our manifesto, which is the latest draft is out very soon, people will be able to read for themselves. There'll be vetting in place. There'll be checks in place. And that's a key thing here when we talk about far left extremism. Globalism is slightly separate, but when we talk about far left extremism, these people are in our civil service. The heart of the establishment, the civil service, the blob, they're in there. They're also in our teaching institutions. They're in education. They simply shouldn't be there. So I'm kind of rushed to say, when you say, well, what are we going to do to deport these people? And also, what are we going to do to get the communists out of our public sector institutions? Look, you and I both know, but for your audience, you need this thing called a royal commission. You need these things called investigative assessments into where the country's going wrong. So I don't want to get too political about all that stuff, but for the people who want to know about the nuts and bolts, you do have to set up special operations. You do have to set up departments. I was speaking to a chap the other day, and we were talking about deploying the Royal Marines as well to help here. And afterwards he said, maybe I'm going a bit too far. Not far enough, I said. Of course, we're going to need the military here as well. So it's very important. There's some fantastic questions you're asking, and your viewers deserve to hear straight answers. Marines, military, it's not just about setting up committees to decide where we've gone wrong. It's about getting these people out. Why are they anywhere near teaching our children, who are indoctrinating them to cower to Islam, reject Christianity, and embrace communist-inspired globalism? But separately, you did mention about globalism. Look, there are satanic forces at work, no question about it, at the New World Order globalist level. There's no question about it. This is what I'd like to ask your viewers to think about, or even chime in on the comments. No one actually knows what the agenda is yet. No one actually knows what's the outcome of this evil, this supranational tyranny? But I can tell you this, and no one does, no matter what you read, no one knows because it hasn't happened yet. But one thing I can tell you is that communism at supranational level, at the global level, cannot happen unless you have communism at the state level. It cannot happen if you have testosterone-fueled masculine men, sovereign borders, and a Christian faith. It can't happen. I think that's demonstrable throughout history, and I'd wager that it can't happen with that in place now. So let's look. Is Christianity under attack? Yes, more so than ever, more than any other faith. Is masculinity under attack? Yes, more so than ever at any other point in time. Is sovereignty under attack? Is freedom of speech under attack? Are our borders under attack? It all makes so much sense. Everything that holds us together as a unified nation is under attack. That's because something insidious, something satanic above is trying to usher in something new. And we can relate that to net zero and climate change fanatics and communism and the nonsense that we see on the streets for the last year, where we see the unholy alliance between the Islamists and the communists. There's all of those things that just make life even slightly more unbearable. But you asked about stopping globalism. Hey, if I knew the answer, I'd give it to you. Without the manuscript in front of me, the answer is Christianity. It's a return back to Christian values. It's a return back to the church. It's a return back to communities. And it's about getting something into power that is incorruptible. It's about getting something into power that wants to save this land and this country. But it has to surpass patriotism. It has to surpass nationalism. And that is Christianity, the one true faith. And it's that power, going back to what you said earlier on about the difference between CivNat and ethnonat, and it is complicated to go further into that particular conversation, because civic nationalism is always criticized by those further to the right. So I say, let's not focus too much on the civ versus ethnat. Let's return back to Christian values and make Britain Christian again.
Yeah, and I think with that, Nick, I mean, obviously we've got the black churches in London. I mean, there's literally tens of thousands of people that have come here as migrants, and they're vibrant Christians, and they would share our values. So I mean, that really takes the legs off anybody that's saying, well, you're far right racist bigots, because the reality is what you're saying is that, I think this is what you're saying, is that the whole of our society and culture is based on Christianity, whether you believe it or not. Look, I've got loads of friends that are atheists, and I've got loads of stick-off people, friends of mine that are atheists, saying, Richard, you're going too far on this Christianity thing. But I think the reality is this idea of cultural Christianity is a good idea, because if that brings people back into the orientation of Christianity, they might not have a genuine faith, but they're acknowledging the value of that faith. So what would UKIP do to promote, let's call it cultural Christianity? I mean, I don't really think there's such a thing, but if that makes people that aren't strong in faith happy, let them have it. What's UKIP going to do to promote the faith? What practical implications on things like the sanctity of life, the trans issues, and so on and so on and so forth? What's going to be the direction of travel with UKIP? Now, there's another question after that. That's the first question.
Oh, Richard, you put me through my paces tonight. I love it. Yeah, I should have known.
You weren't going to get me to ride, Nick. You weren't going to come in here and have a little chat.
There's me thinking it's going to be the easiest media-friendly interview ever. No. Listen, let's do it. I like it. No, let's do it. So let's go back to the missions. We're going to place Christianity, British culture, British people, British agriculture, British business first above all else. So I would just like to remind people that, again, in the missions, it's right there. Place Christianity back into the heart of government. But let's talk policy here. Okay, so there's a few key areas. One, in our manifesto, the subsection is called motherhood, and it talks there about how maternity pay is so problematic because it forces women to choose to go back in to work super early rather than have more time within the home as well. Like you said, you mentioned about atheism and you mentioned about cultural Christianity and the Richard Dawkins stuff. You're right. We're not going to discriminate against atheists or agnostics. That's very true. And there's a reason why we're not called the UK Christian Party. Okay, so that's fine. So there are some practicalities with regards to encouraging women to stay at home for longer. In a speech I gave at the UKIP conference, I spoke about the nature and the importance of two gender roles with regards to homemaking and with regards to child rearing as well. So I think that's a huge point here, that unashamedly a party such as UKIP will have leadership who isn't backing down on the nature of importance of the two different gender roles, and specifically on homemaking. With regards to abortion, at the moment, if the child is suspected of having cleft palate or any kind of disability, you can abort up until birth. That is absolutely disgusting. It is absolutely disgraceful. That should be nowhere near legislation. So with that, that'll be brought down to 24 weeks. So at the moment, sorry, 20 weeks. At the moment, the legal limit for abortion is 24 weeks. Both that limit and also the limit on disabilities will be reduced to 20 weeks. Now, there's a couple of other really important points here. You say, what are we going to do for Christianity? I want a crucifix in every single public sector building. So if you want to go into the meat and potatoes, let's do it. And I'm the one that gets to green light the manifesto. So it's little things like that. So we can talk a bit about abortion. We can talk a little bit about maternity pay. Surrogacy, banned, illegal, no more. Absolutely not. There's another one. As I said, crucifixes in the building. There are more elements to this, but it's quite important. I'm really happy that someone's finally asked me and pressed me about Christianity. And when we talk about it at leadership level and in the missions, well, what do you mean Christianity back in society? Well, what we're going to do is, you mentioned the trans issue, we're going to put back into this kind of links back to far left extremism within our institutions. The reality is that we're going to incentivize families. We can't do anything about trans people, Rich. If someone wants to dress up, they're a bloke and they want to dress up as a woman, that comes onto our piece on crime and punishment. That's got nothing to do with families. So these people, if they go into female-only spaces, at the moment, the only question at UKIP with regards to sex offences is you get 5 years or 10 years mandatory. So best of luck to all the perverts and liberal perverts out there that want to engage in that sort of thing. But you asked specifically about family. So yeah, that's the other piece as well, is we're going to incentivise families to, much like the people are familiar with the Hungarian model, we're going to incentivise families via tax breaks and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is, Nick, obviously, I think, we've discussed all this enough. You know that I'm absolutely on the same page you really with all of this. I've got to put my hands up to say that, but I've got to dig deep in to find out exactly what you believe for the people that are watching the channel. What happens if Nick gets kicked out of UKIP? And I'm a member of UKIP now, and we all get kicked out because we believe things that are deemed to be far too extreme, even for UKIP. So, what's been put in place to make sure that if UKIP start this course, that we don't get some liberal lefty infiltrators coming in, like I think's happened in Reform. I know I said I wasn't going to knock Reform, but I think that's what's happened. We don't get Islamists coming in. We don't get a Muslim chairman. What can we do to make sure that doesn't happen with UKIP? What can you put in place on a constitutional level to make sure that doesn't happen?
So, as you know, Reform has had enormous criticism for not being democratized, whereas UKIP always has been democratized. But also, we could criticize that because democracy allows for the absence of authoritarianism, which is required to stop the thing that you're talking about happening. So, for those of you that aren't aware, watching the show, we are democratized, and we have a constitution. And everyone who's in place is in place legitimately. Can you address? I'm trying to think of the best way to address your point, Richard, because it's a really important point. Yes, anyone can be replaced, but it has to be replaced. It has to be replaced based on the NEC. That's the National Executive Council for UKIP. It has to be replaced based on their vote of no confidence in me. So, for example, anyone who's a member of UKIP, when it comes to selections, can apply to be on the National Executive Committee. Now, of course, that's where my control and influence ends and the chairman's begin. So what I would say is this, is that, or continues rather. So what I would say is this, for those ex-UKIPers out there that have got questions about 2016 onwards, I'm fully aware of the backstory with regards to who was running things and what went wrong. What I would say is that was 8 years ago. Now, 8 years ago, we didn't have the Black Lives Matter or the radical trans lobby, climate change. I actually can't remember back to Brexit, but I do remember but we didn't have it anywhere. It's happened in, I don't know, the last 4, 5, 6 years, to the point where now we're all in complete dire straits with our mental health and anxiety and depression. I get it. I can relate, guys. I understand. So that was a completely different time. That's what I believe. It's a completely different time. I trust in the system. I trust in the council, and I trust in the chairman to keep the missions and the rebranding and the relaunch of the brand spearheaded by myself, to keep it on the right. And you're right, UKIP has been infiltrated in the past. Everything's infiltrated constantly. Everything's infiltrated, but that's where party discipline comes in. I mean, if it reassures you and your audience, I'll give you an example. Over the last 3-4 days, maybe the last week, there have been a few incidences where I've said that behaviour is absolutely unacceptable, and that's not to be tolerated within the party. So unfortunately, they've got to go. That's all I can say really about that at this stage.
No, I mean that's really encouraging to hear. And if the chairman's on board and the rest of the leadership are on board, because obviously if you're doing this, if you were kind of pushing forward on your own, you didn't have the full backing of everyone in that leadership team, you know, it's massively important to have that broad consensus. There was a guy who put a comment in the comments, and he was saying that we can't vote our way out of this. What's your answer to that, Nick? People that say, you know, democracy's finished, we can't do anything about this. What's the answer to people? And a lot of people say that. A lot of people are saying that.
Yeah, so it's a field day for me when I'm lucky enough to be face to face with somebody that says that. All you have to do is say how, why, tell me how we can't. Reform have just got 5 MPs and 4 million votes. UKIP's glass ceiling under Nigel, under Brexit, glass ceiling, reform, glass ceiling. If Jenrick gets in and moves the party to the right, reform's over. Muslim MPs, to the gentleman that said that, there's 25 Muslim MPs in Parliament. Our Justice Secretary is Shabana Mahmood. When have you ever heard any of these people condemn radical Islam? When have you ever heard them ask a call for radical Muslim hate preachers to be locked up? And you're saying you can't vote your way out of it? The Muslims are voting their way in. Reform have voted their way in. UKIP, circa 2015-16, it did very well. It's the same as when people bring up the first past the post system as well, Richard. It's a fantastic opportunity when people ask these questions to hear the truth about the benefits of first past the post, the nonsense of proportional representation, and that it's not understood by people. And the fact that if you can inspire people to get active politically, and when I turn up in their town to come and listen and hear me speak and give me the time, I will draw a parallel here. We are too right wing for a lot of reform voters. We're too right wing for a lot of patriots, Richard. So we talked about Islamism, globalism, communism, and now you're saying, right, well, let's talk about the fourth elephant in the room. What about the 40% that don't vote? Hey, look, if people are checked out with democracy, that is a tragedy, because that will be our undoing. That very sentiment will be our undoing. I believe in democracy 100%. I believe in voting 100%. But I know what it's like to say, no, I'm not going to vote. What's the point? I'm insignificant. I don't matter. This stems from the breakdown of communities. It stems from the breakdowns of families. It stems from trauma and anxiety. It's all these things that make a man wake up in the morning, or a woman, and think, I'm not worth anything. And my heart goes out to the brother that said that. He is wrong. And I would love the opportunity to speak with him about how we can reinvigorate, remotivate, re-inspire, and then retake our country back. Because apparently reform and the Muslims are doing it. Demonstrably, you can do it, and we will do it in 5 years' time.
Exactly. And I think one of the things is, Nick, that people aren't factoring in before the election. Now, listen, I've got a minuscule social media following compared with some of these guys, but Tommy and Lawrence and Calvin and Carl Benjamin, Maya Tusi, you know, all these guys with, I think Katie did as well, all these guys with massive social media following said, give your vote, didn't say lend your vote to reform for this election. They did that. And how were they thanked? That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to say this isn't a reform bashing thing, because I'm far more interested in what UKIP are doing than sitting here criticizing a reform. Another thing, Nick, if you just elaborate, because a lot of people are talking about proportional representation. Just for listeners, I believe proportional representation is a disaster, because it means that you're stuck in a constant left-wing progressive coalition if you get that, right? That's what's happening to Geert Wilders. That's what's happening with all these right-wing parties on the continent. Just explain that, though, again, in layman's terms, why PR is a bad idea, and why UKIP, if they get that 40% that don't vote mobilized, and I'm going to use the word radicalized in the best sense of the word, not radicalized to do crazy stuff, but radicalized to vote. If we can get that 40% mobilized and energized, how does that take away this argument for reforming the voting system and having a second elected chamber and all the nonsense that the crazy people are trying to get us to do?
Well, I think I'll simplify it somewhat, and that is to say that, well, first of all, I'll echo what you've just said. So proportional representation, no system is perfect. For sure, it's PR, guys. So for PR could work. I mean, it could work, but it just depends on how many far left nutcases you've got getting into power. So I thought the idea was we're voting our way out of this. I thought the idea is we're going to retake and win back our country. So we first past the post works great. Once you're there, you then have a shot at actually delivering back to the people and what they need and want to see. You really do have that opportunity. Whereas what you said is quite succinct. You've got all those parties that can tally up and form coalitions when it comes to voting. So, for example, the Lib Dems would happily get into bed with the Greens. My goodness gracious me, the Conservatives would happily get into bed with the Greens on a lot of things as well. Gay marriage, trans rights, gay pride, 12 months of the year, etc. So do we really want, and I'm going to pull reform up here, they campaigned for proportional representation so very hard. They told their voters, we will get proportional representation. Well, reform aren't interested in proportional representation. They lied to you. They want first past the post system. They said that to you because it sounds exciting, it sounds different, and they used it with the phrase "smash the two-party system." Smash the system. Get proportional representation. Get us in there so we can go and do our job. They're not interested in proportional representation, and there's 5 of them swanning about Parliament. And I doubt, well, maybe Rupert's been to his constituency, but has Nigel even been to Clacton yet? What do reform voters think about that? Is that okay, or do we just need to see pictures of him with a cigarette in a pub because he's one of us? He's one of the lads. Is that all we need to see? Is that how are we that silly? Are we? I'm not. We're not that silly. People aren't that silly. So the proportional representation drum got banged an awful lot in the build up to the election, and now we have to unpack what that means. It's not about saying which system is better or worse or whatever. First past the post system works incredibly well if you actually get a result out of it. Again, demonstrably. And proportional representation is tactically dangerous in case those far left and progressive left coalitions form.
Well, that's it. I mean, that's what's happened on the continent. That's why we've got the situation that Geert Wilders is in. When he gets it, he wins a majority, but he can't form a government because all the progressives gang up against him, and even the right wingers that don't believe what he believes. I think there's a friend of mine in America called Don Keith, and Don said to me, he says, "You've got to make it too big to rig." And it's and I think what you're talking about doing, Nick, is doing something that's never been done in British politics, in history. So of course people are skeptical, of course people are scared. But I think, you know, what I've heard tonight has given me so much confidence that you've thought all this through. You're not just, you know. And by the way, tell us a little bit. I'm going to ask it, we'll get off all the hard politics now into a little bit of fun. But, you know, to me, you've thought all this through. UKIP's thought all this through. And there's some very solid policies there. A lot of people listening will be frightened by some of the stuff that we talked about. But I think what they've got to realize is it's a bit like what's going on in the Middle East at the minute. There's something far worse than not standing up to evil, and that's being dominated by evil. And I think if we allow ourselves to be continually dominated by what's been crushing us, it's only going to get worse. And there has to be, and it has to be political, and it has to be peaceful. You know, Tommy's talked about this a lot, this mass movement of people, of working class people. And I think those, the sort of the populist Tommy movement and UKIP coming together could be a phenomenal, you know, marriage. Where was I going with that? But yeah, I think the reality is that what you're saying makes so much sense to me, and I think most people watching it will make sense too. But a little bit of fun. I saw that you had a bit of fun going into conference on do you know what? I wish I'd had this video ready. I could have dropped it into the tell the viewers what happened, and then we'll let you go, because you've done an hour of grilling. Let's have a bit of fun now. Tell them what happened when you went into conference on, I think it was Saturday.
Yeah, no, it's great. No, I really appreciate it, Richard. And we could talk a lot more. I do just want to tack on to what you just said there. In terms of not being able to sort this out, let's be very clear. If voter apathy, if voter indifference, if voter ignorance, if that is to reign supreme, then we might as well all go home now. Let's be immaculately clear. I'm one man. If everyone's checked out and no one wants to fight, and you want to drop your trousers, then we might as well go home. So let's be very clear. I'm in this until the end, until the bitter end. I'm in this, and you're right. Probably not been done before, but it can be done. It is not impossible. But if everyone goes, we don't want it, and you want the Islamists, and you want the unchecked migrants, and the unchecked, and you don't want to be in power in Parliament writing laws to sort all this out, and you don't want to make Britain great again, you don't want to make Britain Christian again, if you want to be overrun by the communists and the Islamists, yeah, check out. Enough said on that. Friday night, I'll tell you about my day. You'll like this. So it was a regular Friday day. Maybe I slept on Thursday night. Maybe I didn't. Who cares anymore? What's sleep? So Friday, long day, 3.5 hours to Nottingham with the smart motorways and the potholes and the 50-mile-an-hour chop change zones and all of that nonsense. I rock up. It's in a sort of country park type place, quite pleasant with the little roads and all the rest of it. I rock up, and one of my guys gets on the blower. Nick, the lefties are outside. Okay, cool. Well, we knew that would happen. I mean, you know, that's always great, isn't it? You know, it's brilliant. Where are they? Because I'm at the bottom of the car park. Where are they? Because I can kind of see the front of the hotel, but there's lots of trees. Oh, they're outside the front. And I went, great. So I've got my gear with me, told my guy to come down, start filming, like what the left are doing and what it looks like. And also, all joking aside, you do have to watch yourself a little bit. You do need to film it because the police work for the left. So you do have to, if that makes sense. So megaphone comes out and then walk the length of the car park. I'd encourage people to go and jump on my X or on UKIP's X to find out what you do with naughty, badly behaved children, and walk through the car park and just told the British public what I always do when opposite one of our enemies, one of the heads of the many heads of the snake, the poison in society, the radical left wing and the liberal radical left wing as well. They're there as well now. They're chiming in with their stand up to racism signs and calling us fascists and bigots and racists. And then, of course, there's always non-whites in the patriotic movement. There's always men and women of color, and they stand with you, and they say to the left, they say, what are you talking about? What on earth do you mean? How dare you? And then the left just turn on them because the cognitive dissonance is too much. And then there's always a sad part to these videos after you guys have gone and checked it out, which I encourage you to do so. There's always a sad part because the police are there and these people, they've got Antifa with them. Now, Antifa is a far left militia in the UK. But interestingly enough, Antifa are gutless. They're spineless. They're cowards. They're not fighters. So they bring in the 18-year-olds from university that have been indoctrinated to put a mask on, and they've upped their game in recent months, depending on where in the country they are. They use musicians to bang the drums really loudly, like with battle cries, because the psychology there is that it puts the fear of God into you. Yeah, well, that's only if you can be interfered with and you are frightened. So of course they do that also to shut you down because you're on the megaphone. But those big bass drums, they're too loud to hear anything over. They then progress closer and closer to the front door of the hotel. And this is where I started to get really upset. So I had one police officer on one side of the door and the other side. I went inside and I spoke to management. I said, have you guys, as a hotel, private property, have you asked these people to leave? They were incredibly distressed. The owners of the hotel said, the management of the hotel said, we've asked them to leave. The police have said there's nothing they can do about it. It's civic trespassing. There's nothing more we can do. Wow. Then I called, and go check out the video, guys. Then I went and actually spoke to the police, and I said, I want to speak to you here, away. And they're banging the drums. Right there's a little revolving door, and they're right there on the, you know, where the little carpet is that all the hotels have. So welcome or whatever to the Royal or the Regal or whatever. It's right there. They're stood there, literally butted up against the door, so you can hear it throughout the hotel now. It's as intimidating and as threatening as it gets. I pulled the police officer in. 6'4" female, and I said, "What on earth do you think you're doing? Like, what on you get where I'm going with this? What on earth do you think you're doing? Get them out of here. I'm not even going to ask you to arrest them. Get them out of here." She gave me a mouthful. She wasn't very happy. She said, "It's nothing to do with us. We're here to police. There's nothing more we can do." You also had the far left. Always, they're there with their photographers. These are expensive cameras. They've got the lenses, and they were taking pictures of every single car in the car park, every single license plate in the car park. The police officers just stood there. They were happy to have a confrontation with us, saying that we were in the wrong. There's nothing that they can do. It's completely lawful. It's a civil offence. It's civil trespassing. They've been asked to leave. They haven't. There's nothing more we can do. So if you and I owned a hotel, Richard, big 5-star palatial joint, no doubt, and the far right, the ethno-nationalists, the neo-Nazis, whatever you want to call them, the far right decided to turn up because we were hosting a small C conservative conference, banging massive drums on the porch outside. We wouldn't be able to do a thing. They could just stand there. Or what about if we went and protested there? We wouldn't be able to. It's nonsense. We'd be arrested in a heartbeat. You'd be arrested. You'd be out of there. So go check out the video, guys, because it's very important to know what we're up against and the mindset.
It is. And I think you did very well, Nick. I mean, I was smiling. I mean, I think what you did, I mean, it's like what we've all done in the last few years. And again, you know, a lot of this, I do mention Tommy, because Tommy's kind of led the way in fearless protest and just saying, I don't care what you're going to say, what you're going to do. And it was in that mold. I mean, I thought it was absolutely, I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And that's the way to deal with them. Don't show any fear, just stand up to them. But again, it brings in a serious question. So if you'd have brought in a security team there and forcibly removed those people from the hotel grounds, it would have been interesting to see how that would have actually played out, because then the police would have had to get involved. They'd have had to brought in reinforcements because there would have been the potential for a breach of the peace. So it's interesting to see that sort of thing. Final question, Nick, and then I'm going to let you go because we've done an hour. Are you coming on the 26th?
Of course.
Good. Loads of UKIP flags.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm a member of UKIP now, so I can say that. So we, you know, we'll get some UKIP flags there. Obviously, the most important flags are the English, the Scottish, the Northern Irish. I like seeing Irish flags at these events as well, because this is to do with Britain. It's not just a UK thing. So yeah, it's going to be. And again, final plug: 26 guys. We need to be at Victoria Station, 12 o'clock for muster. We're setting off at 1 o'clock. We're heading down towards Downing Street. We'll end up where we end up. But it is going to be a good event. It's going to be properly policed. It's going to be properly stewarded. We've got a lot of security. It's going to be great. And Nick, it'll be great to see you there, mate. We'll have to get a beer afterwards.
Yeah, I'll be there. Of course I will be there. Wouldn't miss it.
And again, I just want to thank we've had steady about 1,700 people watching this stream right the way through, Nick. So that's good numbers, you know. So and they're coming here because they want to hear what you've got to say. And Voice of Wales just popped up there somewhere. Well done, Nick. There you go. The Voice of Wales lads are giving you a thumbs up as well. Nick, good seeing you, man. You take it easy. I know you've got loads to do. Let's dive off the stream. We'll have a little chat in the green room afterwards. See you all, guys.
Great stuff. God bless. Thank you guys. Thank you.